You're listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, the voice, Jeff Tucker.
Hey, do you remember 1995? 1995. It's like it was only yesterday, even though it was 23 years ago. That was the year that Batman was forever, and Val Kilmer took over from Michael Keaton. That was the year that Kevin Costner starred in a little tiny film called Waterworld, which at the time was the most expensive film ever created by Hollywood. It was also the year that a little tiny movie came out called Mr. Payback. You've probably never even heard of Mr. Payback. Mr. Payback only played in one theater in LA for like 2 weeks. It made $0. It might have had a DVD release. I'll have to look into that. I've not done a lot of research. But the deal with Mr. Payback was that it was a 30-minute short movie written and directed by Bob Gale. Yes, the Bob Gale from Back to the Future. Starring Christopher Lloyd. Yes, the Christopher Lloyd from Back to the Future. And the gimmick was that at certain points during the film, you were given a choice, and the audience would use these special clickers to vote on which direction they wanted the movie to go, and whichever got the most votes, that's how the movie would go. It was arguably the first interactive big project ever put on the big screen. It didn't go over well. It didn't click. It didn't mesh with audiences. I remember I really wanted to go see it, because I like weird things. I'm into that weird stuff. Sounds good to me. But it never caught on, and I don't think there was ever a follow-up. I'm trying to think. I think there was another attempt at this just a few years ago with some sort of romantic comedy where you had to vote, and the audience's responses were put on the screen, and you could see like a little bar would go up to see what was getting the most votes versus where it would go. But again, the group voting, someone's always going to lose. The odds are that every choice you want to make in the movie is outvoted by everybody else. That could happen. So the only way it would truly work is it was a singular experience, which basically, instead of making it a shared movie-going experience, it's more like a filmed series of video game cutscenes, and you're controlling the narrative. Yes, that brings us to Netflix's Black Mirror Bandersnatch, which was released in December. I didn't even know this was coming out, and I'm a big Black Mirror fan. I've been doing Black Mirror episodes. I have to pick that back up. But I wanted to do this one-off real quick to piggyback with last week's Bird Box, because they're very similar in their problems. Bandersnatch is a noble effort. It probably took twice as long to write as it did to film, because all of the branches that you're giving the audience as options have to be thought out all the way to the end. You can loop back and use the same ending for 3 or 4 different branches, but those branches still have to be there. So I get the intricacy of it. As a kid, I loved Choose Your Own Adventure books. And if you've been watching the news, the Netflix and Black Mirror people are being sued by Choose Your Own Adventure because it's referenced in the movie. And I thought it was odd. Why not just option it? I bet if they approached the Choose Your Own Adventure people, they would have said, yeah, cut us a check and call it a Choose Your Own Adventure movie. But, Black Mirror wants to be its own thing. I get it. But you can't be your own thing if you're borrowing somebody else's thing. You know what I'm saying? You can't borrow individuality. You have to create it on your own. And this is a Choose Your Own Adventure movie. It just is. And so they, writing this thing out and then producing it and then, actually getting it on film or, getting it in the can. This is a huge undertaking. It's a lot of material. And when I set out to watch it, I'm such a fan of Black Mirror. I thought, I'm going to sit and watch every branch of this thing. I am going to do it because you can check out on your Netflix account. It'll tell you how far into that you are. It's, you have 40 minutes to finish or something. But I tell you what, I gave up. I watched quite a few endings. I gave it my best shot, but Bandersnatch did me in, and it did me in the worst possible way. It did me in a way that I was bored watching it. Initially, it was very exciting. The novelty of choosing what the character does is, for me, a writer, it's very interesting. I'm totally into it. And then as it progressed, it got less interesting. It became, here's another choice that's going to result in the same exact consequences. Because some of the branching choices are, imagine if you are on a freeway and you end up taking an exit, and the exit circles around, shows you something interesting, and then puts you right back on the highway. Well, there's quite a bit of that in it, because ultimately the Black Mirror people are still telling a narrative. So they're not willing to go completely crazy all at once. You know what I mean? It's not like they can just keep branching out and branching out until it's absurd, although they do a little bit of absurdity. Or it can't, here's the problem. It can't stray too far from the story they want to tell. That's the problem. Whereas in life, if I were to stop recording right now and get up and walk outside and just keep walking, that's a choice I would make that I don't know how it's going to end. But if we're telling the story of a guy doing a podcast, guess what? I have to keep doing the podcast. So you see the problem. And it's not a problem in that it's not a good story. The problem with Bandersnatch is that it's twofold. The first is that it suffers the same problem of Bird Box, and that's nothing is explained. This guy is going off on this dark journey, and there's really no rhyme or reason to it. We're never let in on what the problem is. And the second is that they're so into telling a bleak story that after the fourth or fifth incredibly bleak ending, you can't take anymore. I just can't take anymore. It's like the happy endings of Return of the King. By the fifth one, I'm like, okay, I just want to leave. Thank you. Happy. Yes, this is the opposite of that. This is dark. Oh, I see the pattern here. No matter what choice I make, this thing is going dark. That's okay, I guess. If that's the story they want to tell. The problem is as the viewer, you have to decide, okay, this is the ending I'm okay with. Let's end it. We're done. Right? And so sometimes you blame yourself. Just like in a Choose Your Own Adventure book. In the Choose Your Own Adventure books, they always had the same gimmick. And the gimmick was, you're a young person and you're faced with a treasure map. Do you follow the treasure map? To follow the treasure map, turn to page 32. If you choose not to follow the treasure map, turn to page 202. And there's the red flag. If you, in Choose Your Adventure, the higher the page number, the higher the odds that you're ending the story. Do you remember this? You'd go, oh no, I'm not choosing 202. Because if you flip to 202 just to see, quote unquote, just to see, it would go, you choose not to follow the treasure map, and you have a fun summer, but nothing exciting happens, and you go home back to your house, you know. But if you follow the treasure map, the adventure begins. You know, what's the line from Risky Business? Yes brings opportunity. You know, I'm paraphrasing. It's another word. But, you know, what the F brings opportunity? You know, you have to say yes and, or there's no story. You know, that's just the way it goes. So the Choose Your Own Adventure books were very formulaic in, if you didn't decide to go on the adventure, the book would end the adventure very quickly for you. So in Bandersnatch, if you play it safe, it ends fairly quickly. So let's get into it. It tells the story of a young man in 1984 who wants to be a video game designer, back when video games were very rudimentary. And this guy wants to change the outlook of games from side scrollers or games that look like Frogger. Like they show a game in it called Nosedive, and you know what? It is almost exactly the kind of game that Activision would have put out back in 1984, because they put out Freeway, where you were a chicken instead of a frog running through the freeway. They put out Gone Fishing, where you had to fish. There was a guy named Stephen Crane that was making all these really clever action games. Games that when you looked at it, you didn't even need the rule book. Like, I get it. So they're very clever in that. And then the character that we're following wants to come up with a new kind of game that's more of a 3D maze game, where each choice that you make branches off into a different thing. It's very meta. The whole thing is meta, and then it gets super meta at some point. But it's very meta because what he's designing is what you're doing. You know, he wants to make a game where your choices have consequences, and you're watching a movie where your choices have consequences. And the first choice you make is what breakfast cereal to eat, because he's having breakfast with his father. And when the controller rattled and said it was time to make the choice, I actually was kind of like, oh, so quickly? I thought it would be like, do you take the bus or do you take a taxi? You know, things that, in my mind, propel the story, not simple stuff like breakfast cereal. So initially, I sat up on my couch and paid attention, because it seemed like, oh, these million little choices are going to add up to bigger consequences. You get that the relationship between the son and the father is strained. We're going to find out later that the father's kind of an a-hole, and wanted the son to grow up faster than the son was willing to grow up. So the father hid his favorite stuffed animal. And so the son missed going with his mother on a train, and the mother had to take a later train, and the train derailed, and the mother died. So that's our backstory with our son and father. They are estranged because the son blames the father for the death of the mother. And probably in some ways, the father blames the son for the death of the mother. Even though initially the father is trying to do the right thing, he reaches out 2 or 3 times, and he is rebuffed by this sullen, withdrawn video game son. So the main character gets on a bus. Then you're faced with picking the music in his Walkman, which again was like, oh, another small choice. And then when he gets to the video game place, which I was laughing, it's Tuckersoft, which is featured in some of the other Black Mirror episodes. He meets the Wonderkind video game creator, this other guy, and he's just real, hey, we're going to make some video games. He's a great character. He's really fun. He's the jaded video game guy. He's seen and done it all, that sort of thing. But it's going to take the new guy in under his wing, right? And the guy that running the company is like, no, you don't have to do all that. We have a system here. We have a team that will help you. And as someone who has worked on big creative projects, sometimes, yes, you want to work alone, but working with a team sometimes is really helpful because you get to have other people's ideas, and sometimes they're better than yours, even though your ego doesn't want to accept that. That is the truth. So when you're faced with a choice of accept help and work on the project or work on it alone, I thought, okay, I'll take the team effort. The next scene showed up. The video game is out. It bombs, and your career as a video game designer is over, and the movie ends. It's the quickest ending I think you could have in it. And I remember watching it going, oh, well, I'll go back and make a different choice when I watch it again. Little did I know that failing at making the video game would be the happiest ending of the show. So, accidentally, I stumbled across the only happy ending in the roster for this guy. Because the rest of them are all incredibly bleak, weird, or just downright depressing. So I went back and I made a different choice to do it on my own. So he ends up back at his house in this other branch where he's adapting a book called Bandersnatch into this interactive video game. And the background on the Bandersnatch book is it's a giant Game of Thrones size choose your own adventure book, which they were never really that big, but I'm willing to go with it. It's okay. But the writer of it, we see him in a little tiny video. In writing the book, he went insane and he murdered his wife. Okay, that's interesting. That's a good backstory. He murdered his wife, but he still managed to get the book out because the book exists. And we're going to make it into a video game. No one ever talks about buying the rights to the book to make it into said video game. But we're just supposed to accept that in this world, you could just pick up a book, somebody else's work, and adapt it into a video game. And we'll worry about it later, the rights. It's never even discussed. But that's fine, because I'm not here to watch a legal show about getting the rights. It's not saving Mr. Banks. Instead, we want to know, what's the deal with this Bandersnatch book? That the writer went nuts. Why did he go nuts? Was it something in the book? I can't wait to see this explored. And guess what, folks? Yes, you guessed right. You chose right. They never explain it. It's never, ever explained in the context of the show why the writer went nuts or why, the more we watch it, our video game creator goes nuts as well. You know, it's like anybody who watches The Ring and then answers the phone dies 3 days later. Or there's a Masters of Horror where there's a movie where anybody who watches it goes insane. But they finally show that. In both cases, they show us what's on the Ring tape. And in the other one, Cigarette Burns, they show us that it's an angel having his wings cut off, and that's why people are going insane. And it's the reveal of that that's so satisfying, because we're left with, oh, well, I wouldn't do that. And Black Mirror is like, well, the less we tell you, the more you're going to like it. And that's not always the case. So if we as we're going through this journey of him making this video game, and he gets frustrated at every turn doing it, it's almost as if he doesn't know what he's doing. Like he doesn't know how to actually make the video game. You know, at one point, it's like keep working or pour water all over your keyboard. And if you pour water all over your keyboard, it ends because he's destroyed his computer. Like, well, why would I do that? Well, if you're done with this nonsense, you pour water on the keyboard and it ends. So you find out again that he's in therapy. He's seeing this woman therapist, and she's there to talk to him about his problems and to up his medication. He's on a lot of medication for his problems with the death of his mother and the fact that he lives with his father but has no relationship with him. The father isn't given much depth in the beginning other than he doesn't like the neighbor's dog digging in their garden. So when you get to the second appointment with the doctor, you have another choice. And the choice is go into the doctor and talk to her again, or you see the video game guy walking down the street. If you choose the doctor, it's going to loop you back around so that you have to choose following the video game guy. That's the only way you can do it. It's the only way the story progresses. So you go to his house and you meet his wife, and he has a new baby. So he's presented as this rebel guy, but he's very sensible. He's got a flat, he's got a girlfriend or a wife and a baby. And then I'm going to help you get through your video game blockage here, man. So they do drugs. They do drugs. And so you're treated to I love drug sequences in movies. I love to see what the take is, because I've never done drugs. I don't know what it's like to do drugs. All I know is what I've seen in the movies, right? So the drug I do is movies. So in this one, the paintings come to life, and they're opening and broadening their horizons. And then for some reason, you're faced with killing yourself. Who jumps off the rail? The video game guy or you? Now, obviously, if you jump off the rail, guess what? The movie ends. You've had a bad drug trip and you're dead. Thank you for calling. If you have the other guy jump, then your character just leaves the apartment and wakes up at home. So the idea then is, did it really happen? Did he really go to the guy's place? Did he really do drugs? Did the guy really die? It's pretty bleak. But he goes back to making his video game. Right? And so then, that pretty much is 90% of the plot of Bandersnatch. He's making a video game. He does drugs with his colleague. His colleague jumps off of the ledge. And now you have a series of, how does it end? How does this thing end? Does he finish the game? What happens? And the endings I got were bizarre. The first one I got really made me smile because it was so ridiculous. Where he's so paranoid now that he thinks he's being controlled. And he starts talking to you, the viewer, telling you, I know you're controlling me. So you can now send him a message on his computer. And you either send him the branching icon, which is also seen in Enemy of the White Bear in the Black Mirror episode. I don't think I've got. Yeah, I did that one. The one where the woman's in a theme park where she's tormented every day because she's an accomplice to murder. You get that symbol, or you get Netflix. And if you pick Netflix, you get arguably the silliest but most fun ending. You say to the guy, I'm watching you on Netflix. And he goes, what's Netflix? And you go, well, it's a streaming service in the 21st century. I'm watching you as a movie. I don't believe you. Okay. So he ends up at his psychiatrist where he says to her, there's a guy on Netflix and he's controlling me. And the whole time this is happening, I am laughing hysterically. It's really fun. So she just goes, well, if you're a movie, you're a pretty boring movie, aren't you? And you're like, well, yeah. And he's like, well, yeah. She goes, if you were really on something called Netflix and you were really a movie, it would be more exciting. So she gets up, does a backflip, pulls out ninja weapons, and starts trying to kill him. And that's where you're like, oh, now we've gone full meta. The character is losing his mind. He knows he's in a Netflix movie, and now it's an episode of Daredevil. Whoa. And so he gets dragged away screaming in insanity, and that's where it ends. Interesting. If you go back and do the other one, the branching one, then the story continues, and it's more about creating the video game still. Except in this one, two things can happen. The first is he discovers through the movie, and I may be paraphrasing a bit here because I watched so many endings, they start to blur together. But in one of them, he goes through his mirror and time travels back to when he was a child and takes his stuffed animal and hides it so his father can't take it. Except in that time frame, he doesn't stall his mother. He goes with her, and they die together on the train. That's a really weird ending. To be so unhappy with how things turned out that you would want to go back in time and die by your mother's side as a child. I found that ending to be really depressing, And most of the endings after this are all depressing. That one just seemed to be the most like gut punching. Like, who would choose that? Certainly somebody would. I wish I could. Let's have a conversation. Why? Why would you do that? To be in her embrace at the end? I don't know. That's so weird. But it was really bleak. So, scratch that ending. There's another ending where he's talking to his psychiatrist about how everybody's watching him. Everything's a plan. The video game guy keeps telling him everything's fake. It's like the Matrix. So in this one, he breaks into his father's study and discovers that his father is an actor and that his whole life has been a case study in how he would react to different stimuli. And that one's really bizarre. And you know what? I totally applaud Black Mirror for that ending. And if that's the one I would have got initially, I might have just ended it because that was really crazy. I wrote a screenplay called Etheria about how this woman thinks the entire world is watching her, and she's right. It is like the Matrix, but in a different way. So I like those kinds of endings. That's, where the conspiracy theorist turns out to be totally right. Those are great endings. So that's one of the endings. Then there's another ending where, for whatever reason, him and the father keep getting into a fight. The father is trying, and the son picks up an ashtray and bonks him over the head and kills him. And this is a reoccurring ending that happens again and again and again. And every time I got it, I was like, how do I stop this guy from killing his father? And once you get into that loop, it's tough to get out of. At one point, you're on the phone with somebody, and you have to give them a code, and I put the code in wrong, and I never got that ending again, so I don't know what happens if you put the code in right. But he murders his father and buries him in the backyard, and then is undone by, yes, the dog who comes over and digs up the body. There's boom, another time he goes to jail, and he ends up in a jail cell for the rest of his life. He's lost his mind. There's another one where he's interrupted burying the body by the wife of the video game programmer saying, have you seen him? He's been missing. And you're like, oh, he really did jump off the ledge. Oh my God, I've killed another guy. And he ends up going to jail. So there's a lot of these, the father dying by, the father getting murdered ending is really hard, because you don't want this guy to be a murderer, but that's what you get. Those are the choices that you make. They end up doing that. And then finally, in what is probably the first ending that they came up with, he ends up in jail, and then it jumps to present day. And the daughter, Pearl, the daughter of the video game guy and his wife, has grown up, and now she is making a video game or some project based off of Bandersnatch. So we've come full circle, and now she's about to go insane. It's a noble effort. It's a fun, well-done effort. Would I like to see another one of these? Yeah, I would give it another shot. Maybe if there was a comedy version something that wasn't so darn bleak every time, it might offset this one a little bit. I appreciate all the hard work and craftsmanship that went into making Bandersnatch. And I'm not sure what I was expecting. I know I got exactly what I was promised. I got a choose your own adventure. And I'm sure there are a few other endings I didn't get, but they all seem to be bleaker than the next. And after a while, I'd had enough. I have to stop. I'll probably go back to it at some point until that status bar is filled to the end. I'll probably check it out, but I won't do a marathon because, again, after the 5th or 6th, 7th, 10th bleak ending, I'd had enough, you know. I love depressing stuff as much as the next guy, but again, there's a limit. So check out Bandersnatch on Netflix if you have it. It's interesting. It's a novelty. Is it the future of cinema? Probably not. You know, it's a lot of work. You know, imagine filming a movie 10 times to get all those endings and different nuances and breakfast cereals and cassette tapes. It would get to be, you know, maddening after a while. You know, it's easier just to tell a linear story and surprise the viewer and not with choices, but with plot twists and turns. You know, I'm old school that way, I guess. The Choose Your Own Adventure books have their place as books. And as books, they're very well done. Even Neil Patrick Harris's autobiography is a choose your own adventure. And it's fun, done in the same style. You know, you have to find the exact spot where he will autograph it. And the only way to find that linear is you don't. If you read the book and follow the clues to move around, you'll never land on the autograph page. I think that's very interesting. If you see that, you should check it out. But, you know, we'll get back to our Black Mirror run through probably next week or the week after. We're having a good time with these episodes. Bandersnatch was the oddity, the odd man out. And the new season's coming soon. So hopefully I can finish before they add more to the barrel. Bandersnatch, which is also, I think, a creature in Through the Looking Glass, which, I mean, he goes through the looking glass at one point during the movie, so I get all the references. But, yeah, check out Bandersnatch on Netflix. What's coming up? The Pinball Expo is coming up in March. That's going to be a lot of fun. Cannot wait to check that. It's one of my favorite events of all time. I love pinball. I love video games, so I dig it. Do you dig it? I want my own arcade at home. And even if I had my own arcade at home, I would still go to the Pinball Expo. And the other thing the family is obsessed with right now, we're watching this ridiculous show on Fox called The Masked Singer. So we're hoping to do an episode about that soon. Welcome to 2019, folks. We are journeying towards episode 400, which is unbelievable. I can't believe we're actually going to hit that milestone. When I set out to do 91 Reasons, I wondered what I'd do past episode 10. And yet, here we are with still more to talk about. So, thank you to everybody who tunes in, everybody who follows me on this weird journey. I was just talking with somebody about, I probably would have had more success on this podcast if I had picked a singular topic, because those are the ones that people really gravitate towards. But I didn't want to limit myself, and less listenership is better to me, or more preferable than sacrificing what I want to talk about. So I appreciate every one of you who listen, who support us on Patreon. Thank God for you people. You guys make the show run. I couldn't be more clear about that. Check us out on Patreon. If you've missed any episodes, all of the episodes are on YouTube. Just look up 91 Reasons on YouTube and you can find 300 plus episodes there if you want to listen to them in the background at work. And thanks for tuning in. I am Jeff Tucker. I am the voice, and the show you're listening to is 91 Reasons.
Thanks Thanks for listening to 91 Reasons. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Find us on Facebook. Is anyone even still listening?
Laugh it up, fuzzball.